Hello, internet friends. My name is Bay, and welcome to the Battle for Azeroth beta and the first pass look at the much-to-do, talk-about, changed Unholy Death Knight. Woo! It was a bit of back and forth, and all of the testing we have done to figure out how all the blocks fall into place for the Unholy Death Knight, as there are quite a number of baseline and... there goes a wyvern. And talent changes overall. Of course, you want to see the entire VOD. That'll be right here on the YouTube channel. Second pass testings will be highlighted over on Twitch. So all, of course, the details for my social media and my Twitch channel are in the video description box below. And if it's your first time to the channel and want to keep up to date with all the first pass, second pass testing, Ireland's possible raid testing, I don't know, that'll be on the Twitch stream, all that good stuff. Go check out that red button down over there that says subscribe. Not your first time on YouTube. You know how to do this. So, Unholy DK. First off, I'm just going to do this and put this on the screen for a moment. So that is your live talents versus your new talents. All right, get out of here. So that's a lot to go over. I will not be going over all the ins and outs of different possible builds and trying to show them all off, because some of the functionality of those are things you have seen before, but they've brought them back. And a number of meh talents that you had access to right now in Legion have been removed. That's sort of how things go, right? In this newest build, and you'll see this in the Frost DK video coming up after this one, the final one, there is no big changes to Frost, but Unholy had a ton of changes in this build, which is unfortunate because I was hoping that both had their changes in one build, but that's just not the case. So overall, let's bring up my notes real quick here and go over all the things that are baseline changed. So there are a few things here. So mastery, where is it at? Dreadblade. This is a few masteries across the board now, and this is kind of an overreaching theme of BFA, is that now it says increases the damage of your shadow damage abilities. That means that exterior buffs that are going to be trinkets and such are not going to be affected by your mastery anymore. So that only affects certain things, but disproportionately specs that had masteries, myself included, that scales exterior things, much like trinkets, you know, external procs or buffs, stuff like that, that aren't bound to your character, will no longer scale with masteries anymore. However, this is not the same because I think Shadow Priest is still broken, unless they fixed that one as well, because that just had spell damage. But again, that's a pretty big overarching theme here, so keep that in mind. Festering Strike now applies 2 to 3 wounds per use, down from 2 to 4, and Festering Wounds stack to 6, down from 8. So now on the pull, you'll hit your 2 Festering Strikes and you can go to town. No longer is the RNG from 2 to 4 Festering Strikes going to be a thing. Big quality of life improvement. Everything else, of course, if I don't mention something, is the same. Ray's Ally got a pretty substantial slight reversion to an older build. Basically, if you played Death Knight for a long time, Ray's Ally used to have, this is your battle res, by the way, used to have a runic power cost. It was removed by a glyph in Warlords, and then it was just made baseline free in Legion. That has now changed. Of course, it's on the GCD now as well. But rezzing someone is way more important than your 2 other globals you'll use, right? So you have to have the runic power ready or build it and then spend it on them instead of on a death coil, for example, in this case. So it's a weird decision-making thing. That's the overarching theme, of course, in BFA as well as that. So there we go. Death Strike for overall usage across the board here. Where the heck is it? Next page. Has been buffed baseline across the board, mostly affecting blood decay, of course, but now it's a 30-second damage window up from 20. Of course, that will have a slight benefit on the DPS Death Knights, but overall, slight thing right there. A big one, Death Coil. It has baseline Shadow Infusion at 1 second per death coil for your Dark Transformation cooldown. This is a pretty big one. It will cool down your ghoul when it is actually transformed as well. You'll see it when we go downstairs in a moment. So that's a pretty huge one. It has 40 runic power cost, down from 45. And of course, the tweaking numbers on how much runic power it costs determines runic corruption, because it's a 1% per runic power you spend. So now Death Coil, your main spending of runic power, is only a 40% chance to proc your runic corruption, down from a 45% chance. But you'll actually use them a little bit more often, right? You'll squeeze out a little more Death Coils here and there because it costs a little less, so it might be fine. But there was a blue post I was told that Blizzard is still going to look at how that feels once they lock down all the new talents and stuff, so we'll see. You'll also notice that the energy regeneration on your ghoul has been removed from Death Coil, so your ghoul is a little bit more passive and baseline. But there, of course, there are talents that affect it, so we'll go over those a little bit. Dark Transformation base, still a 1 minute cooldown, but is a 15-second duration. Again, you're going to have more uptime on it by default, so, I mean, by default, you have a little bit less in the window, but you're cooling it down all the time now with the new way the Death Coil works. Army of the Dead is now an 8-minute cooldown, down from 10 minutes, and they last, the ghouls you summoned last for 30 seconds, down from 40 seconds. And no, none of the apocalypse-based debuffs they used to have, that they have on live right now, are carried forward. They're just ghouls. They summon and slap things, and then they explode and die. Well, they don't explode unless you take a talent. And then during Death and Decay, of course, Scourge Strike will hit all targets. Your main target will still burst festering wounds placed by your pet or by the Death Knight, if you were curious about that. We did test that a bunch to see if it still did all the bursting madness. That still all works there. And everything else is the same. So Control Undead copped a pretty substantial nerf if this is not a bug in the tooltip, where you can no longer control things above level 70, which seems awkward and flavor ruining in some way, but we'll see. And as you've seen it sort of staring you in the face right there, Apocalypse is your new baseline major rotational cooldown, other than just Army of the Dead at the pole, and then that's it, right? So Apocalypse from the Apocalypse weapon itself rolls forward. So it's a 90-second cooldown where you bring doom upon your enemy, dealing shadow damage. So, and again, any shadow damage is going to be affected by your mastery. And it bursts up to 4 festering wounds on the target. And again, on the pole, two festering strikes into a Apocalypse. Totally doable, because there's no more random crazy RNG rule of that, right? It's 2 to 3. And then it summons an Army of the Dead ghoul for 15 seconds for each burst festering wound. I read this like 4 times on the VOD earlier. It's confusing. It should read for each festering wound you burst. Whatever. Verbiage, it's fine. Also, movement-wise, there's been a little bit of a change to the Death Knight. You're noticing that there's no Wraith Walk anymore. It's because Death's Advance has returned. I go over this a little bit in the Blood DK video, but now, because the build is live, passively, you cannot be slowed below 70% of normal movement speed, and for 8 seconds every 45, if you then choose to, you can get a little micro sprint going on. Say 30% sprint, and during the little micro sprint, you cannot be slowed below 100% of normal speed, and you are immune to forced movement effects and knockbacks. This is your baseline little movement speed tool there. The DK is still going to be slow. However, you can take the new and improved Wraith Walk, which you can have both. It does not replace it. It's a 1 minute cooldown where you sidestep into the Shadowlands, removing any root effects on you at the time. Doesn't break the snares or the stuns, which is the current version you could talent into, I think, on different DKs. But it's a 70% sprint for 4 seconds. We'll grab that real quick here. Still has the broken animation where your sword flies out of your hand. But it's a 4-second sprint, and again, if you do anything during it, it will stop the effect. And while active, your movement speed cannot be reduced below 170%, which is what you are moving in the Wraith Walk, because you're King Leoric from Here's the Storm, right? So, you have a little more mobility options. You have 2 little sprints, a little micro sprint that makes you not go any slower than 70%. And then, of course, you have Wraith Walk. Both have that, like, anti-movement synergy that is really neat for the Death Knight overall. but that is a movement upgrade. Still gonna be kind of slow, but a little less slow. Just a little bit less slow. But everything else is the same, except this new guy right here called Reap Magic. So it is an offensive purge with a 10-second cooldown, 40-yard range, where you will reap one beneficial magic effect from the target, removing it, not giving yourself anything from that debuff or buff or whatever it was. And it grants you 25 runic power if you do pull something off of the target. So you have that as a little bit more of your toolkit. Of course, you still have grip. That is the same. IBF is still a 3-minute cooldown, 20% for 8 with the stun removal. Stun immunity, rather. So you can couple that, of course, with Wraith Walk. That's still very much a thing. Overall, everything else is the same. But pretty huge baseline changes to the DPS Death Knights. Frost will see similar things in the movement department, of course. But now let's look at your talents. And again, I will bring up your on live talents right here and do a little bit of a comparison. So talents that have been removed. Dark Arbiter, Castigator, Sludge Belcher. I'll pause for the ringing praise and thanks. And hopefully it's a glyph eventually. But Sludge Belcher was, and I reported this in Legion in beta testing, that why would you not just have it always Sludge Belcher, because it's a better version of your base ghoul. But it's gone. Necrosis is gone. Shadow Infusion, at least the talented version, is gone because you have a baseline ability, right? Lingering Apparition, Corpse Shield, and Blighted Rune Weapon. Now, side note, Blighted Rune Weapon and Dark Arbiter have been rolled into other talents, which we'll go over in a moment. So your new talents are Death's Reach, Wraith Walk, Gargoyle, Corpse Explosion, Inevitable Doom, Unholy Blight, Death Pact, and Dark Infusion. All right. So going over some of these, there are many that have been changed and some that have been moved around a whole hell of a lot, as you can see there on screen. But Clawing Shadows remains the same. All Will Serve still summons Rasputin, which is the additional skeletal archer, the skulker, that just sort of auto attacks. He does AoE things. Basically, he just kind of sits there and does his thing. His animation is still busted. His AI is still busted. If you change targets and tell your ghoul to go somewhere else, he'll still attack these. Don't worry, Rasputin, you'll get him. One day you'll get him. That's fine. Are you gonna change targets? No? So I don't know. It's a flavorful talent because it gives you the extra skeleton and it makes you have like this little undead army. But he keeps you in combat forever, as I will try to get out of combat now. Okay, there we go. Gosh. No, he's still shooting. Is he still? Oh, he's okay. That's my virulent plague. Oof, gosh, that was so weird. On the testing VOD, he would keep me in combat forever. Anyway, so still one of the lamest talents, I think, for Unholy. And Infected Claws moves up over here. Well, still has the 35% chance to cause a festering wound on the target when your ghoul uses the Claw ability. Of course, when you empower your ghoul and it becomes Claw goes into the AoE, the Rake, that of course still applies AoE chances for festering wounds. So by default, you sort of have Infected Claws almost set and forget, or Clawing Shadows, depending on if you need the mobility tool, because you can Surge Strike from range, basically. So you can still do the weird, funky stuff with Clawing Shadows, where you can AoE from forever away. You can still do stuff like this. You can throw your AoE for whatever reason. That's still a synergy you can do there. And Clawing Shadows is pure shadow damage, so it does do more damage than a Scourge Strike. Scourge Strike still has that sort of 50-50. It's not really 50-50 exactly, but it is the physical damage. Where the heck is it? So many new abilities in here. But where's the Scourge Strike? Hello? Oh, duh. There we go. I wanted to read it and I didn't toggle off of it. Too much testing today. I tested after I raided, so my brain. But yeah, you still have like the physical and the shadow damage back and forth there. So Clawing Shadows does a little bit more damage by default because it always ignores armor, because it's always magic damage. But we'll see how that works out. Soul Reaper now does not cost anything. It will generate a rune when used. You have it's a pretty significant shadow damage dot, but it's a 45-second cooldown, and if the target dies while under the effect of the Soul Reaper, you'll gain 10% haste. which I suppose is fine if you can actually get the 10% haste to work. But overall, it's not... get out of here. Bye, Rasputin. But overall, it's not very... It's going to be a numbers thing overall, I'm assuming. Because the generation of one rune for nothing feels fine in the rotation, but it's basically like 1.2 runes or 1.25 runes a minute. Not super great. Maybe it is. Inevitable Doom is actually the double Doom artifact trait. So a sudden Doom triggers 15% more often and stacks up to 2 times. So sudden Doom, to go back here, is still your auto attacks have a chance to make your next death coil cost the runic power. That is still either a chance or RPPM. I think in the database it says that it's like 1 point something times haste or 2 point something times haste. It's like really kind of a low chance. But as haste is a huge stat for Unholy, you get about 3 to 4 a minute, depending on RNG. Inevitable Doom just makes it happen 15% more often. That's it. And you have the 2 charges, right? You have the charge security there. And then Pestilent Postulios, or Pustules, that's just a Zim reference, has been reworked. It's roughly the tier 19 from Legion 2-piece. So bursting a Festering Wound has a 10% chance to grant you Runic Corruption. This, again, of course, does work with the AoE effect. So if you have a whole bunch of wounds out here, like you do, and then you wait for your death coil to your runes to come back up. If you do burst a bunch of these because you do AoE hit, like there we go. There was a stack right there. That could have been from the one I'm hitting right now, but the more targets you have set up with all of your Festering Wounds that you do pop during your Death and Decay cleave strat, right? It's how you, the base of how Unholy AoEs. You have a 10% chance per one of those that pops to proc Runic Corruption. So, and that works the same way with your tier 19 2-piece, I do believe, what I was told. Over here, we have Unholy Blight. This is returning, sort of, kind of, I'm going to say the word Fester Blight. And if you remember playing the Fester Blight build back in MOP, I believe, it was awesome and terrible, and it had Unholy DK snapshotting, and it was way too good and or awful if you couldn't do it. I don't know. 1 minute cooldown, 1 rune, that's a little baby raptor. You surround yourself with a vile swarm of insects for 6 seconds, stinging all nearby enemies and infecting them with an unholy disease that deals shadow damage. It is shadow damage. Over 15 seconds. This acts just like Virulent Plague, though, does with Outbreak. So it will keep restacking it, and then, of course, the dots start ticking. So it does have, like, this internal pandemic effect where it will pandemic itself to 20 seconds. But it keeps refreshing for 6. So it's actually a much longer dot than the 15 seconds it is. And because it lasts on you for 6 seconds, the animation right now is kind of probably placeholder. You can pop Unholy Blight and then run around with your newfound mobility and stack up a whole bunch of blights on different mobs in different parts of a encounter or dungeon or whatever. But by default, it's just an extra dot. So you can have that with Virulent Plague, and you can put your Unholy Blight out there as well and sort of dot the things up if you like that as your playstyle. Or if it works in like 1 minute rotation window where you need to do like a bursty AoE. So you want to put your Virulent Plague up, you want to get your Unholy Blight out there, and then we'll of course talk about the new Epidemic in a little bit. Ebon Fever is a Virulent Plague, will deal 15% more damage over time in half the duration. So it's 15% more damage on your Virulent Plague. It's of course via Outbreak. And it does in half the time. So because it will tick faster, as a higher chance just overall, because you're casting it more often to do the 30% eruption effect, right? That you're used to right now. That's the passive. This basically is stolen from Arthas back in the day. But that's just Ebon Fever now. Move down here. And then Bursting Sores was updated a little bit. So it's squished to 25% damage on the bursted wounds, down from 50%. But it still has that this sort of Fire Nova effect on Bursting Sores here. So if you stack up a whole bunch of your... Let me get this going here. The setup time, of course, for the Unholy DK for AoE is still very much a thing. I'll try to get these set up for a moment. Do one of those. And then, of course, when you burst these, it will not hit the target that is being burst. It'll only hit the other targets around them. So right now, per hit, right here, there's 4 targets. you'll get 3, 6, 9, 12 bursting swords. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Because they don't hit the target they're burst from. They hit every other target around them. But that, of course, still happens right there. So you get the extra single target burst and the festering wound bursting hit as well. So you get the 4 hits right there that do more damage. So single target and AoE potential here, of course. So does Ebon Fever, so does, you know, Unholy Blight. These all sort of fit into whatever rotation. A lot of these talents were talked about today on stream about being this tier alone, being very stat oriented, because Ebon Fever will obviously really scale up your mastery, but only on one thing. Bursting Swords will obviously be more beneficial if you have more haste, because you can actually set up that big AoE thing and then, you know, react to it before the actual, because your festering wounds still only last so long, right? They only last for a little bit of time on the target. Yeah, they last for 24 seconds. So you only have so many GCDs to put around to spread those. And again, of course, Infected Claws with your transformed ghoul. When it cleaves, it'll help you do that, but only so much. Death's Reach is new. It's 5 extra yards on Death Grip, and killing an enemy that yields experience or honor resets the cooldown of Death Grip. That reset does not work currently, but the range obviously is still there. So you have a big old range Death Grip at 35 yards. Asphyxiate still remains there as your 20-yard range, 45-second, 5-second stun, single target. And then Deliberating Infestation still remains as your outbreak is the 50% snare. Of course, you still have Chains of Ice, but obviously Chains of Ice costs the rune for one target. It's still at 70%. It was not squished. So if you need even more snares and slows, you can do that with Deliberating Infestation. More grips or your stun. Went over Wraith Walk already. Spell Eater just gives you 9% more. Anti-Magic Shell is 30% of your HP as an absorb, right? Baseline here. Plus your versatility, right? Spell Eater just gives you 5 more seconds on how long the shield lasts and 30% more effectiveness, so it's 39% of your actual HP. Wraith Walk, and then Death Pact. This is not the Death Pact of old. It's a 2-minute cooldown right now where you create a Death Pact that heals you for 50% of your maximum health, but absorbs incoming healing equal to 30% of your max health for 15 seconds. So on-demand big health stone, however, what happened to me? So it's half your health, but then you get 30% of your health as a healing absorb shield, which of course you could eat off yourself with some death strikes, because again, the 30% window. Now, it's only going to heal you for 10% if you haven't taken a lot of damage, of course, so you have to throw out 3 of them to remove it yourself, but that's still there. But the on-demand big health stone is still there too. So again, if you need this, or more mobility, or more soaking, Spell Eater is still a slight DPS increase cooldown though, because of the fact that if you do eat up a whole bunch of spell damage, you do get runic power. That is still there. But again, aggressively using AMS and not having it when you need it will result in less DPS because you'll be dead. If that's the case, right? So that's still very much a thing. Slightly, more mobility is also more damage for the Death Knight too, so keep that in mind. I'm going to go over Epidemic. This thing has a lot of potential to outscale a ridiculous amount. However, there is some hidden behind the scenes AoE scaling where Virulent Plague apparently through Outbreak, like it only goes to so many targets, and Epidemic will only erupt on up to 20 at a time. Now, this is hidden behind the code somewhere. I think the Acaris Discord will have more information about the new Epidemic, so if you want to, of course, dive into that, go for it. But usually a lot of AoEs have AoE scaling, right? They only go up so many before it just becomes ridiculous. And when the last time you actually had 20 mobs to AoE anyway? But anyway, it causes each of your Virulent Plagues to flare up, which is the 30% chance that they do normally, right? So it flares them up on purpose. It'll deal more damage, however. The normal passive flare-up, as you see real quick here, it deals only 323 shadow damage when they flip. But the flare-up deals more when you force it to with Epidemic. Costs 30 runic power now. The charge system is gone. And then there's an additional amount of shadow damage to all other enemies near them. So the target flares up and explodes on itself, single target, but then it has a little bit of light AoE around it. Now, of course, it looks ridiculous because you do stuff like this. Let me pull out my bars first, you know what I'm saying? Hello? Oh. My runic power's all gone. Can I have my runic power back, please? There we go. So. And then, of course, there's the Epidemic hits right there in chat. So it has a huge benefit, as I kind of derped on the setup for that. It is a AoE runic power spender, which I know Death Knights have been asking for and hoping for a very long time. Because on AoE right now, you just kind of hit Death Coil. But now Epidemic is an AoE spender for your runic power in that sense. However, it does not work with Sudden Doom right now. And obviously at 30 runic power cost, which is a good thing, it has a 30% chance to do runic corruption versus, of course, the 40 from Death Coil. But you're trading AoE and cleave damage anyway versus just Death Coiling a single target. But that is the new Epidemic. It feels quite good because you can definitely build and spend with like a really AoE focused build here. You can definitely get some nasty combos because you can build more, right? If you keep getting runic corruption because you're slamming them Scorch Strikes during the Death and Decay window, you can definitely get a whole lot of use out of that. Now, of course, again, setup is a huge thing. Let me get my ghouls out here too, why not? Yo! Trying to get runic corruption proc right there. That's helpful. One more of those. But you're going to have to weave in, because you're going to generate so much runic power per hit, right? With this build. So there's a bit of a weird feel that by default, you'll set up, and I guess you use Death Coils to proc runic corruption earlier to get your runes back faster. And then you'd go into the Death and Decay window where you'd be at low runic power, you would do your AoE, you'd build a ton of it up, and then you'd Epidemic. Which feels like it's supposed to be. Or you just weave it into the rotation where you would Scourge Strike, Epidemic, again, if your pet's helping you out, and that kind of stuff. And this, of course, is with trying to get extra procs of runic corruption through the Pestilent Pustules. And then Bursting Swords, of course, adding to that additional cleave damage on top of Epidemic. So when you're Epidemicing, you have that explosion. And when you're Scourge Striking, you have that explosion. I like the Unholy Blight version of this better, because you sort of just set Unholy Blight up when you're doing everything else, and just it does all the extra damage too. So, get my ghoul in there, transform Imp, see if I can get some extra stacks. But you just want to cast this, cast that, and then you can just drop one of these, and then Epidemic a few times. And then wait, see I didn't get a proc before, so I got 1, 2, 3, and then you got 3 more. And this whole time you've got your, essentially get 3 dots going on, right? Your D&D down for 1 period of time. Unholy Blight's going as well. Virulent Plague is going. It's doing its whole eruption thing. You're forcing it to erupt. So huge amounts of AoE damage potential in this kind of a setup. And again, your Infected Claws will help. Defile is a 5-second reduced cooldown version of Death and Decay now. 30 on live, so it's 5 seconds less. Does not have the mastery scale, so it damage does not scale up per tick. It just gets larger per tick. That's still the same. But its damage compared to D&D is nearly 2 to 1. Death and Decay at this level does like 740 damage. Defile does 1600. So we're talking about like pure single target builds. Defile might actually just be worth the 1 rune cost on pure single target because it's just that much damage. And the slight cooldown reduction compared to live also means you get a little more value out of it as well because the cooldown on live is just twice a minute. So you'll get a little bit more out of Defile, but it still grows in size when it deals damage to things. It still definitely gets larger and larger and larger for whatever effect that is. Mostly flavor, because normally when all the stuff is AoE'd, it's all together anyway, but whatever. Still there. Corpse Explosion is new, sort of. Ghouls summoned by Army of the Dead and Apocalypse explode when they die, dealing shadow damage to nearby enemies. Currently, not scaled properly, as you will now see as I summon all my ghouls, the damage they do is quite ridiculous because it's not scaled to... Hello? You want to attack the target, please? I didn't hit Control 1. But right now, and you can have a ton of ghouls. You get 8. Oh, there it goes. Oh, geez. There it goes. There they go, rather. Oh, yeah. Oh. Uh-huh. That was my 4 from my Apocalypse, and here goes the actual Army of the Dead ghouls now. So, the tooltip might just be wrong. It's not taking into account mastery, which is fine. But the blow up for over 1,000 damage per target right now seems really high. But the drawback is that it does work on your Apocalypse ghouls and your Army of the Dead ghouls, but that's it. So unless there's some other talent that can help you summon random ghouls sometimes to be sort of like a shambler effect, all will serve. Just rework this thing. Just make it go away and make it... Popping wounds gives you a chance to summon ghouls randomly, so it gives you corpse explosions. Very powerful. Not a lot of talents impact baseline cooldowns, but that is corpse explosion. So, neat. Summon Gargoyle is your... what's it called? Dark Arbiter from Live. My brain just farted right there. So, the exact same reaction to Dark Arbiter as it on Live. It's just that it's Gargoyle now. So, very, very single target focused. Sudden Doom procs do stack 20% damage into it, even though it was free. So that still is there. Of course, you can Epidemic with it, but it's only 30. It's only 15% damage versus the 40, which is 20%, because it's every 1% damage every 2 runic power you spend. So that all does work. Gargoyle is very, very single target focused. Inevitable Doom works really well here. Bursting Swords does as well, because you're going to be just very focused on pure single target. Infected Claws here, Clawing Shadows, I don't know. But I don't want to show you Gargoyle, because it does what it does on Live, right? I'm going to wait for 3 minutes for this cooldown to come back up. But it's the same as it is on Live. It's just that it's not Arbiter anymore. It's your Gargoyle. So, which feels more flavorful, I suppose. Unholy Frenzy returns, sort of, in a weird, different way, where it sends you, the actual Death Knight, into a killing frenzy for 12 seconds, increasing haste by 20% and causing your auto attacks to infect the target with a festering wound. So there's your Blighted Rune weapon. And the old school Unholy Frenzy, but is, of course, only on yourself, with a 1.25 minute cooldown, and it definitely feels good when it gets going. It's a 1.5 minute cooldown there, but the haste amp is a little bit... Whoops, wrong button. The haste amp is kind of ridiculous, so you can stack this with heroisms, and you have a really short cooldown on this, and it will, of course, work with your rune regeneration rate, because during this time, your runes will generate faster. But it is more of a rotational light form cooldown, and it does almost sync around every Apocalypse window to sort of help you always set up for your next Apocalypse, which isn't a huge deal. Less of a deal for AoE, but obviously having the extra haste would be helpful. But not a big deal for AoE because you have a much better talent for that. Dark Infusion. Dark Transformation lasts 5 seconds longer. So there's your 5 seconds you're used to on Live right now, right? So Dark Transformation will last for 20 seconds. And Death Coil reduces the remaining cooldown of Dark Transformation by an additional 3 seconds. That means that Death Coil will do 4 seconds. You're used to 7 on Live, but again, because it always works all the time now, even when it's transformed, right? So if I transform my ghoul, I'm gonna build some runic power real quick here, and then I'll change my talent. So if you transform your ghoul, just to make sure I show this off in the video, then you're getting 4 seconds per Death Coil here. Even the free ones. So the uptime on your ghoul is going to be, in transformed anyway, it's going to be way higher, right? He might have like an 80% uptime with this build, with this talent alone, for infecting claws all around the place, and of course for the other improved abilities, because it still has the improved leap, which is the immobilize, and it still has the gnaw, which is the 2-second stun, which again you'd probably have to, like, if you want to not have it auto cast, right, you gotta make a macro for it or just turn it off and then actually use Control 5 or whatever you want to bind it to. So those are still there when it's in its improved form, right? It's evolved form if you want to do that, but your transformed form. But I said for AoE, and obviously there's infected claws, bursting spores, all this kind of stuff that works with it. Oh. It works with Epidemic. Epidemic reduces the dark transformation by just 3 seconds. It doesn't get the baseline 1, because by default it doesn't work with that, but it gives you 3-second reduction. So when you are using it for AoE and are using it for the Epidemic style play, Dark Infusion synergizes with that directly. So obviously there's a huge push for Dark Infusion being your AoE talent, and Unholy Frenzy and Gargoyle are going to be your single target options that may fight each other based on the fight style or the build. Situational in that regard, but it definitely feels quite good to do stuff like this. So I'm gonna transform, get my other ghouls out here. Why not? Try to get an Arbiter proc. Just go on assist. Come on. I'm crazy. So there's the cooldown reduction each time. It'll look like 4. It's definitely only 3 though. But if you're doing this kind of a build, of course I probably should get around here and get, whoops, that's the wrong button. The weird thing about this is that sudden doom procs, you definitely want to slam down. So much setup. And it's easier to do this on actual target dummies. There's the reset again. I think we're good to go. One of those. I didn't get a proc. Damn. There we go. Do one of these and then break some. Oof, gosh. Yeah, right there. And then again, cool down. 3 more. Yeah. Recast that one. Got a free sudden doom in there. And you're already back. Oh, the cooldown's already back up almost. So very, very neat. Very A and B playstyle with more uptime on your Dark Infusion to transformed ghoul for the AoE style. But that's Unholy DK. You can put together the rest of the builds and your thoughts about that, of course, as I show this off in this sort of sterile environment to go through everything. Looks really good so far. Also looks like crap. Soul Reaper looks really weak. Clawing Shadows needs to be a little bit stronger, but not too strong to make it not just weaker than Infected Claws all the time. Corpse Explosion might need some more synergies elsewhere. Everything else looks pretty good, though. Thank you very much for watching. Check out the VOD on this channel if you'd like to watch that later on, of course. Or you can go check out the actual live stream in the video description box down below. Also, my other socials are down there, too, if you want to know when I'm going live. Facebook, Twitter, Discord, all that good stuff. Or subscribe right here to the YouTube channel to keep up to date with all the first pass, second pass, islands, dungeons, discussion videos. We're talking about the GCD eventually sometime soon. Sometime soon. That's Unholy DK. Then what you think in the comments down below. Quite a bit has changed. I will see you all in the final first pass video for the Frost DK up next.